right, let's go ahead and get started. I'll pray for us. Father, thank you for the privilege of looking at your word, a word that is matchless in terms of its influence on the world, a word that's beautiful, that's powerful, that changes lives, has changed lives and cultures. I pray that your word would change our lives today, that we could receive the due humility that we need. You say you resist the proud and give grace to the humble. The world does not cherish humility, but you say that you dwell with the humble, and we want you to dwell with us. So would you grant us more of the right humility that all your people have? I pray as we look at this section in John 12 and 18 and 19 that you give us insight into your word. I pray we would love your word and that we would treat it as your word. And I pray that that would be a means of grace in our lives to draw us to yourself. And we pray all this in Christ's name. Amen. We're getting to look at a very interesting idea today, Jesus and as the new Passover. And the position that I'm trying to argue for is that there's a God-intended connection between the Jesus event and the Passover as it's listed in Exodus 12 and Leviticus 23. When you look at Exodus 12 and Leviticus 23, it's pages full of seemingly mindless minutia that in many ways seems not to make any sense at all until you realize the connection with the death of Jesus. And once you realize the connection to the death of Jesus and go back and read the details, it's amazing that 15 years before the Jesus event happened, someone seemed to know the minutiae details. And so what we're going to look at today is John, who's going to help us make those connections. If you wouldn't mind helping me, please take attendance quiz 13. It's bizarre to think that after Monday, we will be 1/3 of the way through the semester. We're 1/3 of the way to summer break on Monday. That's kind of hard to believe. And on Monday, we're 2/3 of the way finished with the year. That 2/3 of the year will have passed on Monday. So it's kind of amazing that that much has gone by already. So what I want us to do is to look at a little bit in John 12 and John 18 and 19. And if you don't mind, we can just read a little bit. We'll not read all 3 of these chapters, but I want to read a little bit. And then we'll dive into the PowerPoint presentation and see some of the connections. So 12:1 says this: Therefore Jesus, 6 days before the Passover. And I want to make the argument that that is a very, very, very important detail. If we were Jews, our ears would perk up, because for Jews, the next day, so 5 days before the Passover, is actually a high point in the Jewish calendar. It's the day that you take in the Passover lamb into your house, and you keep that Passover lamb the 10th day of Nisan, the 11th, the 12th, the 13th. You keep it through the 14th day of Nisan, and as the 14th day of Nisan is becoming the 15th day of Nisan, which for Jews happens at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Passover lambs are slaughtered. And what we're going to see is that John, with this little detail, Jesus 6 days before the Passover, and if we go down to verse 11, he's going to say the next day, so the next day is 5 days before the Passover, that Jesus was taken into Jerusalem, and he was kept safe the 10th day, the 11th day, the 12th day, the 13th day. They crucified him on the morning of the 14th day, and then John is going to tell us that as the 14th transitions into the 15th, the moment when in the temple, not 200 yards away from where Jesus was crucified, in the temple they were slaughtering the Passover lambs. They were singing the Psalms of Ascent, Psalm 120 to 134. Jesus could hear those psalms being sung as worshipers walked up the 15 steps to the temple area. And John is helping us connect that, but only if we take seriously this statement that what he's about to describe was 6 days before the Passover. Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany. Bethany is two Hebrew words. It means Beth, which is house of, and Ani is my affliction. Jesus starts his ministry in Bethany beyond the Jordan in the house of my affliction. He is bringing his public ministry to a close in Bethany, the house of my affliction, where Lazarus, and we're going to see next time, Eleazar, God helps is his name, whom Jesus raises from the dead. Jesus is going to the little town just before Jerusalem. If you think of Lowe's in relationship to Bryan College, that's the same distance of Bethany where this is happening, and then Jerusalem where Jesus will be crucified. He comes into Bethany where Lazarus was, whom he raised from the dead, whom Jesus has raised from the dead. And they made for him a meal there, and Martha was serving. It's interesting that we get the word deacon from this word. Deacon is someone who serves. And Lazarus was one of those who were reclining with him. Therefore, Miriam, and Miriam is the full name of Moses' sister, so a lot of little girls in Judaism are named Miriam, or Mary for short. Miriam, having taken a liter of perfume made of pure nard, very valuable, anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. What we're going to see in chapter 11 next time, that John's going to tell us that Mary was the woman who wiped Jesus' feet with her hair. You could take that to be referencing this event, and certainly she did that, but it may be that John is telling us the unnamed woman in Luke 7, that Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't tell us who that woman was. John is saying that woman was Mary Magdalene, and she's the sister of Lazarus and the sister of Martha. And if that's what John is saying, then Mary Magdalene actually does this event twice. The one in Luke, she's unnamed. She's called a sinful woman there. She wipes Jesus' feet with her tears, anoints him with very valuable perfume. And John is saying Mary Magdalene is that woman, and John is the only one who tells us that she did it again. But if you read the story, there are no tears here. She criticizes Jesus in 11, which we'll see on Monday. But here she comes again, and it says she had a liter of perfume, and we'll just keep reading. She wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Therefore, Judas, and if we had time, we would see that the word Judas in Greek and the word Judah in Hebrew are exactly the same word. Judas is how the Septuagint translates the name of the patriarch Judah. And if you remember in the story, Judah sells Joseph for money. And here we have Judas in the New Testament selling Jesus for money. And so there's some kind of meta-narrative connection going on. And he's called Judas. I'm going to call him Judas, so we kind of make the biblical theological connection. And he's called Ishkarioth. And for a Hebrew reader, the word Ishkarioth, those are two very familiar words. Ish means something like noble person. So sophisticated human being. And then Karioth is how you say towns in Hebrew. He's the sophisticated man of the towns, Ishkarioth. If you were looking at the outward giftedness of the disciples, I wonder if everyone's obvious choice for natural-born leader would be Judah, the Ishkarioth, the man of the towns. He is the one who carries the money, and usually in any group, you put the most clever and sophisticated one in charge of the money. And so I wonder if that's what's going on here. Judah, the man of the towns, one from his disciples, the one being about to betray him, he said, why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to poor people? And I don't think this will hit us rightly until we convert the money. A denarius is how much a full-grown muscular man would make for digging a ditch 12 hours for one day. So if you imagine a full-grown strong man who's doing physical labor for 12 hours, how much money would that person make? I'm going to guess something like $15 an hour. So you're almost talking $200 for a denarius. And if a denarius is $200, then 300 denarii would be a year, virtually a year's wage of ditch digging. We would be talking about something like $60,000. Now, I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine you have a Starbucks coffee cup, a large one, and that's perfume instead of coffee. And that perfume cost $60,000. Do you have an intelligent reader question that runs through your mind? And remember, Mary Magdalene's brother, Lazarus, in Luke 16 is forwarded as the quintessential poor person.
How did she get it?
How did she get it? Why did she get it? If we do research, some people think that nard was imported from the Himalayas. We're talking about importing something from India in antiquity. We may have a clue in Proverbs when it says the immoral woman sprinkles her bed with nard. In John 8, Mary Magdalene is said to have been delivered from 7 demons, and if John is saying Mary Magdalene's actually the woman in Luke 7, well, there she's called a sinful woman. Help me. There's two different. One at the beginning in Luke 7, at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. That woman's unnamed. This one is 6 days before Jesus died. The one in Luke 7, it says the woman's crying her eyes out, and it says she's kissing the daylight, cataphileoing, kissing the daylights out of his feet. And it says in Luke 7 that she poured the perfume on Jesus' head and on Jesus' feet. And it says verbatim that she wiped, as she's crying her eyes out, she's embarrassed that her tears are hitting Jesus' feet, and so she's using her hair to wipe Jesus' feet. We're going to see in John 11, before this event in John 12, John says Mary was the woman who wiped Jesus' feet, which makes me think there was only one woman who did it. And then after Mary Magdalene criticizes Jesus in John 11, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. She's saying, you messed up by not coming and healing my brother. But then we have Mary Magdalene coming, what appears to me a second time, with $60,000 worth of perfume. She does the same miracle, only we're not told that she cries her eyes out here, and we're not told, at least as I read it, that she anointed Jesus' head, but we are told that she anoints Jesus' feet. And I don't know about you, but I've got nothing but questions. Like, $60,000 worth of perfume seems like an extravagant amount of perfume for a woman to have.
I feel crazy. I thought that Mary and Martha was different than Mary Magdalene.
It seems to me that John is saying Mary Magdalene is the Mary of Mary and Martha. And remember, Mary Magdalene, it says in Luke 7, because she loves much, she's been forgiven much. And recall that of all the people who run away at the cross, Jesus' mother is there and Mary Magdalene is there. And of all the people who are witnesses to the resurrection, Mary Magdalene is the primary witness. The text doesn't tell us this, but I wonder if this isn't a tool of trade, and that Mary had been an immoral woman, and The Luke 7 is her repenting of her lifestyle. And she broke with the past and she followed Jesus. It's interesting that Jesus says that she kept this ointment for my burial, which, if Jesus said it, I believe it. I don't know how he means that. I wonder if she lapsed, if she fell back into immoral ways, and then this is her recognizing that she was way out of line in criticizing Jesus. The Secretary of Jewish Literature calls her Mary Magdalene, and Magdala, at least in the Jewish literature, is the word tower, Migdol, like the Tower of Babel is the Migdol. And the Talmud says that the red light district in Jerusalem is called the Tower District. And so I wonder if she's being called Tower Mary, and this is, if she lapsed, she's coming back, but that's pure speculation. Jesus said she kept it for my burial, so it may be that it isn't lapsing, but rather she actually had forethought. I wonder if Jesus isn't putting the great spin on it, but I don't know. It just seems to me like John 11, in light of John 12, is interpreting Luke 7 and saying that unnamed woman there is actually Mary Magdalene. But I wanted to do this one first so that when we do that one, you can go look for yourself and see where you come down. But why a woman would have $60,000 worth of perfume is strange to me. And it's odd that the very word that's used is the word in Proverbs of the immoral woman sprinkles her bed with nard. So I don't know. Be a Berean. See what you think. It's interesting that Judas, it says, he said this not because he cared about poor people, but because he was a thief. Where else have you heard the word thief recently? The devil, and we saw in that it's religious leaders who are saying, hey, I'm a religious, and Jesus said, look, there are people who say that who are really thieves. This is an example, is it not? $60,000, how lavish. We should have sold that and given it to the poor. And this is what it says. He said this not because he had a care for poor people, but because he was a thief. And having the money bag, he used to pilfer what was put into it.
So in the Greek, at the direct translations I've looked at, it looks like when Jesus is talking to her about she has kept this for my burial, or she has done this for my burial, that it's like future tense, like she's kept this. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Is it future tense? Yeah. Well, this one at least says, he said then, Jesus, leave her
Alone. Yeah.
in order for the day of the burial,
She may keep it.
She may keep it. So,
Yeah, it's an aorist subjunctive, but it is in terms of English. It would be a future act. So what she's doing now, she's doing connecting it to the fact that I'm about to be buried.
okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
The poor you always have with you, me you will not always have. Therefore, the great crowd from the Jews knew that he was there, and they came not on account of Jesus only, but in order that they might see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. But the chief priests were planning in order that they also might kill Lazarus. So where else have you heard of someone who will steal and kill recently? These are the false leaders, and their solution is Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and people are believing that. Let's kill Lazarus. They're claiming to be God's leaders, but they're frauds. They don't care about the ways of God. They care about their own belly, and Jesus is helping us see that. And then we had verse 12. I think I misspoke when I said it was verse 11. It says, and on the next day. So if the previous day is 6 days before Passover, what would this be before Passover? 5. If we were Jews, bells are going off. This is an important day for us. And in the time we have left, I just want to look at something. The connection that the New Testament makes with Christ and the Passover. Paul, in passing, says Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. So there's a connection in Scripture between the death of Jesus on Passover and Christ being the Passover lamb. There's a feature that we need to understand before we ever will get this right. And the feature is that for Jews start their day about 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And for them, the day changes. Like 2:50 is one day and 3:10 is the next day for a Jewish person. And I have had the good fortune to have a number of Jewish friends over the years. And one of my Jewish friends told me that the formula for the day changing is if you look at the sun and turn your back and look straight out, that when you can see your own shadow in your peripheral vision, for me, like the edge of my peripheral vision, when I look straight out, is about right there. That's when the day changes. And if you want to convert that, if you look at the sun, and I don't know if you know this, but you hold your hand out to the horizon. Each hand breadth is an hour. Each finger is 15 minutes. I don't know if you knew that. You can do that and like tell the exact time. So for me, if my peripheral vision is about right there, that's going to be 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. So 3 hours before the sun goes down on the horizon is when the day changes. And that would be about 3 in the afternoon. And if you go to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem and you get there about 4 o'clock on Friday, Jewish people will be celebrating the Sabbath. And you say, why are you celebrating the Sabbath on Friday? And they'll say, because it's not Friday, it's Saturday. And you say, well, how do you get that? And the Jewish person will say, well, there was evening and morning day one. A Jewish day has an evening first and then a morning. And If you go to Atlanta, large Jewish population, you go into the Jewish section of town, you'll see people walking to synagogue on Friday night because driving a car would be work. And so what we would call Friday afternoon, post 3 o'clock, they're calling the Sabbath. And so for Jewish people, the day changes at 3 p.m. And we're told that Jesus dies at 3 p.m., which means that Jesus died as the 14th day of Nisan transitions to the 15th day of Nisan. Are there questions about that? That can be a little confusing, but that is the standard view. A lot of times our non-Jewish study Bibles will say the day starts at sundown, but that's not true. It wasn't true historically. The documents don't say it. The documents all say 3 in the afternoon, and that is the current practice today. Jews sacrifice the Passover as the 14th of Nisan changes to the 15th of Nisan. So the precise moment, they were told in the Mishnah that they did it in 3 waves, but the last wave of the sacrifice ends as the 14th is transitioning to the 15th, and then they eat the Passover on the 15th of Nisan. If you say, well, where do you get all that information? Well, once the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, Jewish people realized that if they didn't write down their practice, it would be lost. And so beginning about 96 AD through about 200 AD, they wrote down their laws, and we have that book. It's called the Mishnah, and they're excellent English translations of it. This one happens to be the one by Jacob Neusner. And this is what the Mishnah says, how you celebrate the Passover. Pesachim is simply the Hebrew way of saying Passovers. So this is Pechasim 1:1a. On the night preceding the 14th of Nisan, so this is when the 14th has started, and it's going to continue until the afternoon of the next day. On the night preceding the 14th day of Nisan, they seek out the leaven by the light of a candle. Any location in which the people do not ordinarily bring leaven does not require examination. This is referencing one of the rules in Exodus 12. And so you hunt the leaven out, you can enjoy the leaven up until 12 o'clock the next day, and 12 o'clock the next day, anything that's leavened or fermented, you take to the temple courtyard and you burn it at 12 noon. What's interesting about that is leaven puffs bread up, right? You get rid of the thing that puffs up. And it's interesting that at 12 noon, when Jesus was dying on the cross, the sun stopped shining. They're burning a fire with the stuff that puffs them up, and Jesus is dying in darkness. If we accept the Jewish way of counting days, this is how it works. On the 10th day of Nisan, on Sunday, we would call it Sunday, they would call it the dawn of Monday. That's when Jews take in the lamb. And so that, John tells us, is triumphal entry. So they're taking in a lamb and keeping it in their house for 5 days. John tells us they took in Jesus on that Sunday afternoon. And they kept him 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. Jesus eats what will be a lambless Passover. He eats it a day early because he's going to be dead when they celebrate it the next day. He eats a lambless Passover meal. and then he's crucified, and at 12 o'clock the sun stops shining. Some people say that's an eclipse that happens. Well, a couple of things about that. Eclipses only happen on the equinoxes, so this would be the wrong day. And we had a total eclipse of the sun here at Bryan College maybe 10 years ago, and it lasts 8 minutes when you have a total eclipse of the sun. This is the sun not shining for 3 hours. This is not an eclipse. As they're burning the leaven, the sun stops shining, and Jesus dies. And then, when the sun starts shining again, Jesus is buried, and the Jews are taking the blood of the Passover, putting it on their doors, and they're celebrating the Passover. And then the next day they're celebrating. Paul references searching out the leaven. Jews call it searching out the chametz. That's the Jewish word. Paul says, your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough? Clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new lump, just as you are in fact unleavened. Why? For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. We Jews look, Paul says, we Jews look for the leaven, we get rid of it, we burn it in the presence of God. Why do we do that? Because we have a Passover lamb. Get rid of the old leaven is what, get rid of the things that puff you up in your own eyes. Have appropriate humility. See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called the children of God, and so we are. The reason the world does not know us is because it did not know him. Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know this, that when he appears, we will be like him, because we shall see him as he is. And everyone who thus hopes in him purifies himself, even as he is pure. How do you know your faith's real? Do you long for God to purify you from sin? Does it bother you when you sin? Do you want to be different? You're not going to want to be different if you don't have a new heart. And if you have a new heart, it's not going to be perfect, but you're going to long for that purity that Jesus has. This is the Mishnah, and we read it, Pesachim 1:1. This is 1:4. Rabbi Meyer says they eat leaven throughout the 5th hour, and so this is the 5th hour after the sun comes up on the 14th day, and they burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour at noon. Rabbi Judah says they eat leaven through the 4th hour, so that's 10 o'clock, and keep it in suspense throughout the 5th hour, and then burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour. Pesachim 5:1 says, the daily offering which is offered between the evenings, generally offered at 3 o'clock, you have 2 offerings that are supposed to be offered. So this is the solution of the Mishnah. The daily whole offering of the afternoon generally was slaughtered at half after the 8th hour. So that's 2:30. And offered up at half after the 9th hour, that's 3:30. On the eve of the Passover, so that's what's happening when Jesus died on the cross, the daily whole offering was slaughtered at half after the 7th hour, so that's 1:30, and offered half after the 8th hour, whether an ordinary day or on the Sabbath. If, however, the eve of the Sabbath coincided with the eve of the Sabbath, and that's what occurs when Jesus died on the cross. It was slaughtered at half after the 6th hour, 12:30, and offered up at half after the 7th hour, 1:30, and then the Passover offering was sacrificed after it. This is proof that the day Jesus died on the cross, the Jewish people, not 200 yards away from the very spot he died on the cross, the Jewish people were in the temple sacrificing the Passover lambs. If we had time, we'd read the rest of the Mishnah. It talks about they were iron hooks in the wall in the temple, and they would hang the lambs up on iron hooks to drain the blood out. And if they had too many lambs to do that, the Mishnah says they would get 2 people to hold a bar between their shoulders, and they would attach the lamb to the wood between the 2 men and drain the wood out. You tell me, does that look like anything that's happening in the Jesus event to you? It looks exactly like what's happening, and the Mishnah outlines it. I encourage you to go. These resources are free. You can, in 2 hours, read the whole chapter on the Mishnah. There's a connection, and what I'm trying to argue here is that God hid in plain sight the crucifixion of Jesus in the details of the Passover in the Old Testament. It's the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings to search them out. And John's helping us here. Therefore, 6 days he comes, so that's the 9th of Nisan. He's right here. Bethany would be like right here, like where the Lowe's is. He's going to come to the Mount of Olives and go to the temple. It's less than a mile from the Mount of Olives to the temple. The next day, so this is the Take in the Lamb Day. This is the 10th of Nisan. They come, they welcome him. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And notice, God in the Old Testament had said, this month will be the beginning of months for you. Normally, in the civil calendar, the civil year begins in the fall, begins at the first new moon after the fall equinox. And God says, we're not going to do it that way anymore. We're going to start calling the new year in the spring. This month will be the first month. This day will be a memorial day for you. You keep it as feast throughout your generations, a statute forever. You shall keep it as a feast. And the word forever there, hukoth olam, that's the same word as like being saved into the eternity of eternities. And we have this lunar calendar that's based on new moons and full moons, and all the dates in the Old Testament are related to these days, and the halves mimic each other. So Yom Kippur is here, and then in the fall you have the Take in the Lamb Day, and God says this isn't going to be the 7th month anymore, it's going to be the first month. We're going to flip it 180 degrees. And God says, I want you to keep this. So the formula is 10 days after the first full moon, the formula is 15 days after the first full moon. The full moon's always the night of the 14th, 15th. 10 days after the first new moon, after the spring equinox. And you say, man, that's complicated. Well, okay, it is complicated. It's weird that we know exactly when that is. Like the autumnal equinox this year will happen precisely at 2:19 p.m. in New York City on the 22nd of September 2005. That's a Monday. And the vernal equinox coming up to will be Thursday, March 20th at 5:01 a.m. If we are Jews, that's very important to us. You can keep that day just with a timepiece and watching the day. And so when the day hits where there's an equal part day and night, then you start counting. And you start looking for the first full moon, the first new moon, which is a black full moon. You have to really watch to see them, but it's a completely round moon, but there's no light. And God says, boom, start counting day one. And so you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Boom, take in the lamb. And then 5 days after that, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 3 o'clock as 14 goes to 15. Sacrifice the Passover lamb. And then Leviticus, we all skip it. He says, on the day after the Sabbath that follows Passover, offer the first fruits. And so Passover can be any day of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Whatever day it is, you wait until the Saturday, and on the day after the Sabbath following Passover, you offer the first fruits. God says, put that in a basket, wave it before me, and then everything will be all right before us. And God says, keep that forever. Does that seem weird to you? Do you know what the formula for Easter Sunday is? Yeah, have you ever wondered why sometimes Easter is in April and sometimes it's in March? You ever wondered that? I'll give you the formula. It's the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the first new moon, after the vernal equinox. And you say, you're telling me that Passover is always the day Jewish people offer the first fruits to God? That's exactly what I'm saying. And that detail is in God's Word and was written down in the Hebrew language. The Bible is written by 40 different people. It's written in 3 different languages. It comes from 3 different continents, and it tells one story. And that one story connected Passover with the death and resurrection of Jesus almost 1,500 years before the Jesus event happened. Now, let me just ask you a question. If you were making up a religion and you were just putting stuff down, 40 different people are going to put their ideas, 3 different languages written on 3 different continents. What's the likelihood that you could make a prediction using nothing but a lunar calendar and get the day of the week right, 3 o'clock right, the 10th day after the first new moon after the vernal equinox, the vernal equinox right, and then have it happen precisely that moment, 1,500 years after you wrote down your prediction? We can't even agree on the day George Washington was born. Look it up on Wiki. There are 2 different dates. We use 2 different calendars. It depends on which one's his birthday. They're 11 days off. He lived 250 years ago. We can't even agree on the day. Whoever wrote this book 1,500 years before it happened made a prediction that corresponds precisely with the Jesus event. And God hid it in plain sight. It's just there. If you want to skip it, skip it. But if you believe that God's true and you give God the benefit of the doubt and you start connecting these events, what you'll see is Jesus died. And did you pick up in John, John's the only one to tell us the type of reed that the guy was holding when he held it up to mock Jesus? I don't know. Does that look like something to you? And the guy standing there with a hyssop branch, 3 o'clock on the 14th day of Nisan, while the Passover lambs, and he's saying, if God just gave me more evidence, if God just gave me more evidence, I would believe. God's given us more evidence, and may God give us the grace to search it out. I'll see you on Monday.